Hello, and welcome to the third episode of Security Leaders, the podcast where we speak to security managers, chief security officers, specialists, and professionals from across the security spectrum. My name is Neil Sutton, editor of Canadian Security Magazine. My guest this week is Owen Key, Director, Advisory Services and Risk Consulting at KPMG in Calgary. Owen started at KPMG back in 2000, but has spent most of his professional career as CSO and Chief Information Security Officer at the City of Calgary. Owen rejoined KPMG just a few months ago to start the next chapter of his career. I recently spoke to Owen about his background as a police officer in New Zealand, his security career here in Canada, including his successful melding of physical and logical security roles, and what it's like to start a new job during the pandemic. Before my conversation with Owen, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Commissionaires.
Start seeing information security as an investment and not as an expense. Now people see that if you screw up, this has a cost. It has a reputational cost. The past couple of years, you've seen the idea of secure by design working its way throughout the food chain. It's something that's spawned from the very bottom of the pyramid. It's working slowly but surely its way up the ranks. People are integrating security in the very process they're building as a veritable cornerstone of their business. My name is Jean-Philippe Descaries-Mathieu. I'm the head of cybersecurity for the Quebec division of the Commissionaires. To learn more, go on commissionaire.ca.
Thank you, Commissionaires, for your support of this podcast. Here's my conversation with Owen Key. Can we just get into a bit about your background? I know you've been in the security industry for quite some time, most of it based in Calgary. But you started off in New Zealand. Can you tell us a bit about your background in New Zealand and how you came to move to Canada?
Well, yeah, so thanks for having me, Neil. I appreciate the opportunity to do this. You're right. When I come back now, it's almost 30 years, which I catch myself, saying each time that I say it, in terms of being both law enforcement and security. So it just means I'm a little old. I was born and raised in Wellington in New Zealand, moved to Auckland when I just finished high school, or college as we call it down there. And did my university degree. I did a commerce degree up in Auckland, but I chose a slightly different career than most of my friends and entered law enforcement instead of the corporate law path or accounting path. I was lucky. I was a detective on a crime squad, ended up doing commercial fraud, and then became one of the first investigators in New Zealand in the 1990s doing computer-related crime. At this period, I managed to meet my wife during part of this, and she's Canadian, so it's inevitable that you're going to come home, and so I transitioned back to Calgary in about 2000.
Okay, when you moved to Calgary, what was your work situation like?
It was lucky. I managed to snare a job. I ended up working for KPMG at the time as a senior manager there. I ended up leading their forensic technology practice, so the computer forensic practice for Western Canada. I had a young family at the time. They're all grown up now, but so travel was quite prevalent back then. It was difficult with the kids, so position with the City of Calgary came up, and I took that in the end of 2004.
What did you start off doing for the City of Calgary? What was your first position like?
I rolled into the manager of corporate security at the time. It was a small section for the law department. They'd just gone through a reorganization of their audit and legal sides, and was fortunate to take a position under the law department, running what I would call a very small security program. There was only 5 of us doing very generalist roles. Asset protection advisory roles in that too. It was a good kickoff for me, a good small area that I could grow upon. So,
yeah, I think I first met you when you were in the senior role at City of Calgary, and it seems to be a real sort of hotbed of security thought. Often I chat with people either in Calgary, within the City of Calgary or within the organization of the City of Calgary, and there seems to be a lot of security forward thinking there, I would say. Can you maybe share a few highlights of either situations you dealt with or policies you helped implement while you were at the City of Calgary?
I was fortunate. We had a phenomenal team, and I also had some phenomenal backing from my bosses at the time, the city solicitor, and so we ended up I had a fairly good vision of what I wanted to do based on the previous experiences, certainly stealing other best practices from other organizations, and as is a number of other thought-leading areas and stuff too. So I didn't really invent a lot of it. We had a great team who was on board. Good support initially, as I said, from the city solicitor and ultimately the city manager and a number of council. And we ended up building a full service security division within there of about 250 staff and contractors, of which I would say probably 70 or 80 of those were at least security professionals and advisory type roles. I wanted to build a full service, predominantly in-house group that I think the city wanted or needed. That's not to say that it would be the most practical one for any other organization. I think every organization is different and needs, can be a hybrid or an in-house or a combination or completely a full service managed services outside. We were lucky we had some early on successes, some large scale frauds that we ended up, which gave us some momentum in terms of our practice. But it was then, well, okay, how do we become a little bit more proactive in our physical security to prevent, in our controls environment, to prevent some of those large scale frauds and thefts?
One of the big challenges at the City of Calgary, obviously, was during the flooding situation a number of years ago. And I think you and I spoke about it for an article. But maybe can you just share some of those lessons learned and how you dealt with that extremely difficult situation?
It was an interesting time. We'd started moving, particularly within corporate security, we'd actually moved towards working a little bit from home and remotely for a lot of our staff anyway prior to that. With the 13 floods, it was at the time, and I think Fort McMurray's fires have surpassed it, but it was the largest insurable loss in Canada. I think it was over 6 billion. All of downtown was underwater, which included the municipal building, included our control center. The city lost its telephone system, and so as a result, we had already had a very brand new structured emergency operations center. I would consider it a world-class EOC and a world-class emergency management agency. It brings every piece of the city together, including every discipline, all the enabling services and the core services the city provided. And as a result, and I think it's well documented, things like the Stampede were back up and running within a couple of weeks, et cetera, too. But, when it came to trying to get everybody working remotely to be able to service our clients, which was the citizens, we put in a VoIP system, or we expanded the VoIP system that we were using at the time within literally days. We had remote VPN and two-factor authentication on demand within days as well too, and expanded those out. There were challenges for IT to look at the networking side of things and the capacity, but it was done very collaboratively. From a security position, I had, my advisors who are mainly investigators were out, doing physical security work. They dropped particularly their core roles and were doing things that we needed to do from an operational perspective. I'm very, very proud of what happened in 2013, the way the city that handled it, and also the way that corporate security handled it. It was extremely collaborative, one of the best times of my career, at least anyway.
And I'm assuming there were some serious lessons learned from dealing with an emergency situation like that, which you could apply to disaster planning, recovery plans, things like that you could carry forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was interesting because Calgary had already gone through in some of its neighboring areas a flood, a smaller one in 2005. And so each year, we would come together as an emergency management agency and practice two main things. And I still remember this. They were flooding and pandemic. The city's had a pandemic plan for quite some time, and so I think those were put in place. Tabletop and real exercises were done pretty much on a yearly basis for both, and I think just being that well prepared has certainly seen the city and other businesses. Because remember, all these businesses downtown wasn't just the municipality, it was all of the major oil players that are based out of Calgary lost their main buildings and were forced into a disaster response and ultimately business continuity planning scenario very quickly. So I would suggest they're probably weathering the COVID side of this a lot easier than most other places around the world at the moment.
One thing I really wanted to talk to you about is how you've managed to meld the roles of physical and logical security. You were certainly one of the first people I met in a senior security role that has successfully balanced those two. Can you maybe give me some insight as to how that came about?
Yeah, it's again, one size doesn't fit all. There are organizations where, information security is under the IT area, and certainly that was the case when I first started with the city, and physical security that I ran, or the corporate security side, was under the law department. And I would never say that, you have to have it all under one area or you have to have it amalgamated. I think there are business strategies and decisions to be made for any organization. But just prior to 2011, I was chatting with the director of IT, and I always had a vision that the two, particularly for Calgary, should be in the same area. Of course, I had a background in forensic, computer forensics, so I had that enough to be dangerous in terms of the cybersecurity side. So discussions with the former CITO at the time, and then eventually we made a business decision together that was quite collaborative to transfer information security over to corporate security and bring that in under house in 2011. I did a lot of research. I did a lot of work, white papers, et cetera, too. And, there was a lot of information out there about the pros and cons of doing such a thing. Certainly, it benefited us. Now, having put it under the same title doesn't necessarily mean the two are integrated. There's still a lot of places, still very much a line in the sand between information security and physical security, or logical security and physical security, despite being under that same org structure. And it's not true integration, really. So for me, the next phase, and we'd started doing this just prior to myself leaving and going back to KPMG, is to start doing a full integration of the two. Security to me is very similar. You're still protecting assets. You're still doing consulting work at the front, the security by design. You have security operations, an alarm and or alert is an alarm and is an alert under both. And then you have incident response, which also has the investigation pieces. So to me, bringing them under, what I would consider a very lopsided bow tie model, where you have security risks, whether they're cyber or physical at one end, operations in the middle, and then trying to reduce the number of incidents and investigations you're doing at the back end. That would be the true integration. Bring that up into a governance, risk, and compliance tool, and if you get me started, we'll start talking about organizational resilience.
What advice would you give to people or to physical security professionals that are embracing logical security roles and vice versa? There seems to be more interplay between the two, either from the technology side or privacy implications or risk, or however you want to measure it. But those two things seem to have come together, especially in the last maybe 5 or 10 years when I guess you were assuming a role like that. What advice would you have for security professionals who are now trying to balance those two?
I think you need to look at the big picture. So for me, you need to talk the language of both business and security. And I know that is a cliche, it gets used a lot, Neil, but to be perfectly honest, you need to have those skill sets and that big picture. To me, we're talking about organizational resilience, and it's particularly prevalent at the moment or relevant to today's world, especially with the COVID, but it can be for anything. That's an organization that is strong. That there's a Maori term in New Zealand called kia kaha, which means effectively be strong. You can get through a lot of shocks and stresses by being a resilient organization. And there are three main components to that. First is your culture, your people. Strong people, strong culture certainly helps, and your morale. Second piece is your financial. Obviously, you need to have good cash reserves. You need to be able to have policies or strategies that in times that are tough, how you're going to deal with those. And then the third piece, which is where security falls under, is that risk management piece. So security, physical, logical, and then safety and a number of others all fit under that, putting controls in place. So understanding that big picture as a security practitioner, especially if you're into the management side, do away with the silos, get out of that mentality that, I only do cyber or I only do IT or I only do physical security. I'm sorry, understand. You don't have to be an expert at it, but understand that what the others are doing and bring those together, because you're all feeding up into that risk mitigation or management and then up into that OR piece.
Maybe talk a bit about how you transitioned over to KPMG now. Like you're now working for an organization that you work for, as you said earlier, that when you first moved to Canada, you've come full circle and taken on a senior security position at KPMG on the cyber side. Can you talk a bit about that transition and what you're doing now?
Yeah, so as I said, not my first rodeo with them. I've worked for only 3 employers in my career: the New Zealand Police, KPMG, and the City of Calgary. I consider myself quite loyal to those. An opportunity came up to come back to KPMG and to work with a huge number of clients that we have around the world. What I like about it, it's a large organization, it's a global organization. I think there's some in Canada alone, 8,000 employees and 37 offices or so. I want to go out there and help those clients. It sounds a little sappy, but one of the partners here has said we want to embrace our clients, and it's actually true. How do we help them get to a point? My role is primarily cyber, although I'm a little bit of a jack of all trades, and I can look at the governance, risk and compliance. I'm in risk consulting. There's a government piece in there. There's the forensic piece, some management consulting, smart cities, et cetera, too. So while my focus is on cyber primarily, there is numerous other areas that we can look at. We're there to assist an organization. I think if you have a look at KPMG, our whole role is about organizational resilience for those businesses, whether it's tax and audit for attestation of controls or trying to minimize your tax liabilities, whether it's restructuring or whether it's risk consulting or management consulting. It's about making those a little bit stronger. And so I'm really looking forward. I started mid-March. I had a laptop couriered out to my home. I haven't even seen the inside of my office yet after 3 months, although we are starting a transition back. So it's been a throw in the deep end, but again, not the first time that's happened to me.
Yeah, you're definitely starting during an interesting time, if I can use that term. An awful lot of us have had to move out our office spaces and working from home, but you actually started a new job during this sort of unprecedented situation where most of us are no longer in our office space. Aside from the things that we've all had to adjust to working from home and dealing with the stresses associated with COVID-19, has it presented any new challenges or any sort of different ways of looking at the world for you?
Again, I go back. I had experiences, as I said before, with the flooding and also just general working from home. To get work done and efficiencies. This one, I'll be honest, has driven me a little stir crazy, and so that far as I've not been able to do proper face-to-face meetings, and I'm sorry, but Zoom and Teams and Skype don't count. That I am a people person. I think you get a better understanding of the issues that people are facing or strategies that their businesses are, or understanding their businesses by being literally in front of them and sitting down and talking turkey with them. So I guess that's the one piece that has been a little frustrating. I know that will come right. We're already starting to relax a little bit on this, and I think everything that we've gone through, we can certainly talk with other people and get best practices. I think our clients have a wealth of knowledge to give to us as to how they've survived or gone through this and the troubles and the issues they've got. And I think that's the biggest issue for most consultants, is that they need to listen properly to the clients they're talking to.
The takeaways from the pandemic, how do you think they're going to be implemented, or how long is it going to take us to absorb these lessons and apply them to future risk and security profiles?
I think you have to look at the business first before we apply the security on top of that. So the business piece is, I think you're going to see, and I think this is also part and parcel of the next generation that want to work remotely or want to work a little differently. Most businesses are going to embrace this and say, I want my staff working from home or working remotely. And I think that's going to continue. I think it'll come back. There'll be a lot of people that do go back to their offices. And so that working from remotely piece was already happening. From a cyber perspective, we were starting to concentrate mostly on endpoint devices. Didn't matter where that person was. They can be anywhere. They can connect anywhere. And so this is just push that forward. And I think that's the biggest thing, is looking at, how do we do network segmentation, some best cyber hygiene practices? How do we look at endpoint, advanced endpoint AV, protect our more vulnerable assets or our more high profile assets? It's not just about perimeter security anymore. And I think, all those pieces that we were doing prior are just going to be accelerated right now. It's quite exciting, to be honest.
Thank you very much for joining us today on Security Leaders. It's been great catching up with you, and I've enjoyed your insights, and we wish you the best of luck in your new role at KPMG.
Thanks so much, Neil. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you to my guest, Owen Key, and our podcast sponsor, Commissionaires. You can find more security-themed podcasts at CanadianSecurityMag.com. I'm Neil Sutton. Thanks for listening.